The silence was the first thing I bought. Not the house. Not the quarter-acre of meticulously manicured sod. Not the two-car garage that would soon house my woodworking ambitions. I bought the silence. It was the advertised commodity of Whispering Pines. A name that promised a life lived at a hushed, respectful volume. After 35 years of deciphering the roaring chaos of numbers, of finding malice in spreadsheets and malevolence in bank transfers, I crave the quiet hum of cicadas and the gentle rustle of leaves. My wife, Eleanor, would have loved it. She was the one who always sought out the quiet corners of the world. Now that she was gone, finding them felt like my final, most sacred duty to her memory. I had just finished wrestling the last box, labeled Workshop Fragile, into the garage when she appeared. It was as if she had been summoned by the faint squeak of the dolly's wheels, an unwelcome genie from a bottle I never intended to rub. She materialized at the edge of my new driveway, a sentinel in a pastel pink polo shirt, blindingly white tennis skirt, and a visor that seemed to concentrate the afternoon sun into a weaponized beam. In one hand, she held a clipboard. In the other, a palpable sense of righteous authority. "Arthur Finch," she asked, though it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "Just Art is fine," I said, wiping a bead of sweat from my brow with the back of my forearm. I offered a neighborly smile, the kind I'd been practicing in the mirror. It felt rusty. "I am Carol Beaumont," she announced, her voice a crisp, non-negotiable instrument. "President of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." She gestured vaguely at the neighborhood, as if presenting her kingdom. "I like to welcome all new residents personally. Ensure a smooth transition." "Well, thank you. That's very kind." Her eyes, small and sharp, weren't looking at me. They were scanning my property, my house, my freshly mown lawn, like a predator searching for a weakness in the herd. They landed on the small set of wind chimes hanging from the eaves of my porch, a delicate bamboo and shell creation that Eleanor had bought on our last trip to the coast. Their gentle, random clinking was, to me, the sound of peace. "The chimes," she said, the two words landing like stones. "Oh, aren't they lovely? My late wife picked them out. They have a wonderful, soft tone." "They are a violation," she stated flatly. Her smile was a thin, bloodless line. "Article 7, Section C, Subsection 4 of the Whispering Pines Covenants. Conditions and restrictions. No noise-producing ornamentation, including but not limited to bells, chimes, or decorative windmills, shall be audible from a neighboring property line." I blinked. I could barely hear them from where we were standing, 20 feet away. "I'm sorry. I must have missed that in the extensive paperwork. They're very quiet. I can't imagine they'd bother anyone." "Mr. Finch," she said, her tone dripping with the sort of condescending patience one uses on a willfully ignorant child. "The rules are not suggestions. They are the bedrock of our community's harmony. They protect our property values. They protect our way of life. One person's soft tone is another's auditory nuisance." She tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "I'm giving you a verbal warning. Please have them removed by sundown." I felt a prickle of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was the old instinct. The cold, clear recognition of an adversary establishing a position. A power play. I had spent my career analyzing the behavior of sophisticated criminals. Men and women who moved millions with a keystroke. But the fundamental posture was the same. "This is my territory. You will obey my rules." "I understand," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'll Take a look at the bylaws again. See that you do, she said, turning on her heel with military precision. Welcome to the neighborhood. The silence she left in her wake was different from the one I had paid for. It was heavier, colder, filled with the unspoken promise of future conflict. I looked at the wind chimes, their gentle dance in the breeze suddenly feeling like an act of rebellion. They played a soft, melodic tune, a sound only a ghost and I could truly appreciate. And across the street, from behind her pristine bay window, Carol Beaumont was watching. Her clipboard, no doubt already loaded with a fresh sheet of paper, ready to document my transgressions. The peace I had so desperately sought had lasted less than a single afternoon. The war for Whispering Pines, a war I never wanted, had just begun. The first official salvo arrived the following Monday. A crisp, white envelope sealed not with a stamp, but with a piece of tape, affixed with aggressive precision to my front door. Inside, on thick, embossed letterhead bearing the Whispering Pines HOA logo, a stylized pine tree that looked more like a spearhead, was a formal citation. Violation Article 7, Section C4, Nuisance Noise, Wind Chimes. Fine 50 boers. An additional note, handwritten in a sharp, slanted script at the bottom. Read per our verbal discussion. Please remit payment within 72 hours to avoid late fees. I sighed. A long, weary exhalation that felt like it came from the soles of my feet. It wasn't about the $50. It was about the principle. It was about the memory of Eleanor. Her laughter as she held the chimes up in that little coastal shop. The sunlight catching in her hair. Taking them down felt like a betrayal. But I was new here. My goal was anonymity. A quiet life of sanding cherry wood and reading spy novels. A protracted war with the local potentate was not on the agenda. With a heavy heart, I climbed a stepladder, gently unhooked the chimes, and placed them in a box in the garage, next to a collection of Eleanor's gardening gloves. The silence on the porch was profound. I paid the fine online that evening, hoping the gesture of swift compliance would act as a peace treaty. It was, I soon learned, interpreted as an admission of guilt and an invitation for further scrutiny. The citations became a weekly ritual. My lawn, which I mowed every Saturday, was fined because a single, isolated patch near the oak tree was measured by Carol herself to be 3.25 inches high, a quarter of an inch over the mandated 3-inch limit. I received a $75 fine for leaving my recycling bin at the curb until 6:15 p.m. on collection day, 15 minutes past the 6:00 p.m. deadline stipulated in the bylaws. Another $50 was levied because the siding on the north face of my house, the side that never saw the sun and faced only a dense thicket of woods, apparently had a small patch of mildew that was aesthetically displeasing to the community. I tried to reason with her. I caught her one morning as she was power walking past my house, her arms pumping like pistons. "Carol, good morning," I called out, trying for a friendly tone. She stopped, her face impassive. "Mr. Finch." "About these fines," I began, holding up the latest notice regarding the mildew. "This seems a bit excessive. I'm doing my best to keep up. I'm one person here." "The bylaws do not make exceptions for staffing issues. Mr. Finch," she said, not a hint of irony in her voice. "The standards are the standards. They apply to everyone equally. It is through this rigorous application of the rules that we maintain our status as a premier residential community." "I just think a bit of neighborly grace would go a long way," I countered. "A friendly knock on the door instead of a formal citation, perhaps." Her eyes narrowed. The formal citation is the friendly knock on the door. It is the official, documented, and legally sound method of communication. It eliminates ambiguity and ensures a clear paper trail. Are you suggesting we abandon protocol? That phrase, paper trail, snagged in my brain. It was my language. It was the vocabulary of audits and investigations. In my old life, a paper trail was a thread you pulled to unravel a criminal conspiracy. For her, it was a club to beat residents into submission. The cold calm settled over me again. This wasn't a disagreement between neighbors. This was a tactical engagement. And she was defining the terms. I decided, in that moment, to play her game. But to play it better. I power washed the mildew. I bought a special ruler to measure my grass. I set an alarm on my phone to remind me to retrieve my trash bins. And I started my own paper trail. I purchased a ledger and a set of file folders. Every citation, every email, every payment confirmation was printed, dated, and cataloged. I took time-stamped photos of my lawn after every mow. I recorded video of myself bringing in my recycling bin at 5:55 p.m. It felt absurd, like I was building a legal case against a gnat. But my instincts, honed over decades of dealing with people who weaponized rules, told me that meticulous documentation was the only shield against a tyrant who operated under the guise of procedure. My workshop sat idle, the scent of sawdust replaced by the sterile smell of printer ink. My quiet life was becoming a full-time job in compliance and evidence gathering, and the silence I craved was filled with the furious scratching of my pen in a ledger. Chronicling a war of attrition I was determined not to lose. The escalation, when it came, was both predictable and cowardly. It moved from the realm of paper and into the physical world, but with just enough plausible deniability to be infuriating. It started with the roses. Eleanor had planted a small rose garden by the front walkway before we even closed on the house. They were her pride, a mix of Mr. Lincoln Reds and Peace Yellows. I had nurtured them obsessively since her passing, a living, breathing memorial to her love of beauty. One morning, I came out to get the paper and found every single bloom, on every single bush, sliced cleanly off and lying on the grass. Not pulled or broken, as a deer or a vandalizing teenager might do. They were cut, with the precision of pruning shears, right at the base of the flower. The message was unmistakable. Even the things you love are not safe from the rules. My rules. My heart seized in my chest. It was a vicious, deeply personal attack. There was, of course, no proof. I walked the perimeter of my property, my gaze sweeping the ground, the street, the surrounding houses. My mind, by force of habit, started constructing a scenario, assessing entry points, potential witnesses, methodologies. It was a small, quiet cul-de-sac. The only house with a clear line of sight to the rose bushes was Carol's. It was circumstantial, but in my gut, I knew. That afternoon, I drove to a specialty electronics store an hour away. The young man at the counter, a tech enthusiast with gauges in his ears, tried to sell me on the popular consumer-grade security systems. This one links right to your phone. Dude, super easy setup. I need something better, I said, my voice low. I need high resolution, low light capability, and a dedicated, closed-circuit local server. I don't want anything dependent on a cloud service I don't control. I need to be able to guarantee the chain of custody for any digital evidence. The clerk blinked, the jargon clearly outside his sales script. Chain of custody. Like for court. Something like that. I said, let's talk about thermal imaging and motion detection zones with customizable sensitivity. I want to be able to filter out squirrels, but catch a human being moving at 2 miles per hour. An hour and several $1,000s later, I walked out with a professional surveillance system that was more suited to a bank than a suburban home. The rest of the week, I was on a ladder, running wires through the attic, mounting cameras discreetly under the eaves. They were small, almost invisible, but they covered every square inch of my property. As I configured the digital video recorder, my fingers flying across the keyboard, setting up IP addresses and secure partitions, I felt a grim familiarity. It was like being back at the office, securing a network against intrusion. Only this time, the asset I was protecting wasn't financial data. It was my sanity. The vandalism continued. Small acts of psychological warfare. A deep scratch along the driver's side door of my car. Perfectly placed to be missed at first glance, but impossible to ignore once seen. My mailbox flag was perpetually left up, so I'd walk out to it expecting a letter, only to find it empty. A small, daily dose of disappointment. One of my downspouts was clogged with a tennis ball, causing a small flood by my foundation during a heavy rain. Each incident was deniable. The scratch could have happened in a parking lot. The mailbox flag could be kids. The tennis ball could have been a fluke. But my new cameras told a different story. The footage was always just inconclusive enough to be useless in a legal sense, but damning to my private investigation. A figure in a dark hoodie and gloves, always moving just at the edge of the light, their face obscured. They never approached from the street, but cut through the thicket of trees behind my property, a path that only a resident would know well. The figure's height and build were consistent. The gait was familiar. It matched the crisp, determined power walk of Carol Beaumont. I had my suspect, but I didn't have proof. Not yet. I archived the footage, labeling each file with a case number, date, and incident type. The server in my basement hummed quietly, a silent, digital witness, waiting for her to make a mistake. The cost of my peace and quiet kept rising, not just in money, but in the time and energy I was pouring into a conflict that felt more and more like my old job, a job I had desperately tried to leave behind. The transition from covert property damage to overt social assassination was as seamless as it was brutal. In Whispering Pines, the digital town square was a private Facebook group called Whispering Pines Neighbors Connect. It was a saccharine feed of lost cats, casserole recipes, and recommendations for reliable plumbers. Carol, as the group administrator, wielded her power with despotic glee, deleting any comment that even hinted at dissent and curating the page into a propaganda arm for her regime. My application to join had been pending for weeks, leaving me on the outside, a ghost in their digital machine. It was my one friendly neighbor, a retired history teacher named David, who first showed me what was happening. He caught me by my mailbox one afternoon, a troubled look on his face, his phone in his hand. "Art," he said, his voice low as if to avoid being overheard. "You should see this. What Carol is posting, it's not right." He angled the screen towards me. There it was, a post from Carol Beaumont from the night before. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive slander. It didn't mention my name, but it didn't have to. A friendly reminder to all residents. It began, accompanied by a cheery stock photo of a smiling family. Community is about more than just following the rules. It's about being considerate and vigilant. Recently, some of us have noticed a decline in the general atmosphere of our peaceful cul-de-sac. There have been unsettling incidents, unusual activity at late hours, and a general feeling of being watched. Please remember to keep your doors locked and report any suspicious behavior. We must all work together to protect the character and safety of our wonderful neighborhood. The comments below were a cascade of manufactured fear and sycophantic support. Oh my, Carol. That's so worrying. Thanks for the heads up. Is this about that new person in the corner house? He gives me a weird vibe. I saw him staring out his window the other day. Just staring. It was creepy. Someone said his car was scratched. Probably did it himself for the insurance money. People like that are always looking for trouble. My blood ran cold. She was painting me as a predator, a threat. The unusual activity at late hours was me on a ladder installing security cameras to protect myself from her. The feeling of being watched was my feeling, now twisted and projected onto me as the aggressor. It was a brilliant, vicious piece of psychological manipulation. She was isolating me, turning the very concept of community into a weapon to be wielded against me. "This is insane," I murmured, handing the phone back to David. "She's done this before," he said quietly, his eyes darting towards her house. "A few years back, a family wanted to build a swing set for their kids. It was technically against the rules for permanent play structures. She made their lives a living hell. Started rumors about the husband's business. They moved within a year. She's a bully. Art. She feeds on this stuff." The social chill was immediate and effective. The few neighbors who had previously offered a nod or a wave now averted their gazes, hurrying inside if they saw me getting my mail. A woman walking her dog yanked the leash, pulling her golden retriever to the other side of the street as I approached. At the community's annual potluck BBQ, an event I forced myself to attend in a misguided attempt at outreach, I was a social leper. People would fall silent as I walked past their picnic blankets. When I placed my offering, a slow-cooked brisket, I had spent 12 hours preparing on the communal table. No one touched it. I stood alone for 20 minutes, a plate of cooling potato salad in my hand, before giving up and walking home to the sound of laughter behind me. The isolation was a heavy blanket. The house, my sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. The silence I'd bought was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of being shunned. It was during this period that my old life began to bleed through the cracks. One evening, staring at the ceiling, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. "Finch," a gravelly voice said, without preamble. "Marcus," I replied, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. Marcus had been my partner for a decade at the agency, a bulldog of a man who could smell a shell corporation from a mile away. "Heard you finally retired to grow orchids or whatever it is you quiet types do," he grunted. "How's the peace and quiet?" "It's a work in progress," I said, the understatement of the century. "Listen, the reason I'm calling. We're looking at some irregularities in the procurement contracts for that Phoenix initiative. You remember? The billion-dollar satellite network deal. The ledgers look clean. Too clean. It has your boy, Dmitry Volkov's, fingerprints all over it. But we can't find the bleed. It's like the money is just vanishing into thin air through nested LLCs. We've been staring at it for a month, and we're getting nowhere. We were wondering if you'd be willing to consult. Unofficially. Of course. Just take a look. See what we're missing." For a moment, I felt the old pull, the thrill of the hunt, the intellectual puzzle. Unraveling Dmitry Volkov had been my white whale for years. I don't know. "Marcus, I'm out." I hung up the cleats. "Come on, Art. For old time's sake. This is what you do. It's in your blood. I hear you're in some place called Whispering Pines. Sounds boring as hell. Don't you miss the game?" I looked around my silent living room, the evidence ledger sitting on my coffee table. "You have no idea. Marcus, I said softly. The game is everywhere. I promised I'd think about it. But after I hung up, an idea began to form. My skills, my training, they weren't just for tracking international criminals. The principles of forensic accounting, of following the money, of identifying patterns of abuse hidden in plain sight, they were universal. Carol Beaumont thought she was running a neighborhood. But every HOA has a budget. It has bank accounts, contractors, invoices. It has a paper trail. And I was the one man on earth who knew exactly how to make a paper trail sing. The isolation she'd engineered had given me the one thing I needed most time to work. Uninterrupted. The war was about to shift to a new front. My front. Having been successfully ostracized, Carol apparently felt that my spirit was not yet sufficiently crushed. Her campaign of harassment escalated from the court of public opinion to the more tangible realm of municipal bureaucracy. She began to weaponize the city itself, using its resources as her own private enforcement arm. The first business card I found tucked into my doorframe was from the City of Northwood Code Enforcement Division. The officer, a tired-looking man named Henderson with a coffee-stained shirt, arrived the next day. "Afternoon," he said, looking over my property with a practiced, weary eye. "Got an anonymous complaint about unpermitted structural modifications." Unpermitted. What I was genuinely baffled. The only thing I'd built was a sturdy workbench in my garage. Yeah, something about a new wall and non-compliant electrical work. Said you were trying to build an illegal apartment in your garage. He peered inside as I opened the garage door. He saw the workbench, a few power tools neatly hung on a pegboard, and some stacks of lumber. He sighed. "That's a workbench, sir." "I can see that," Henderson said, shaking his head. "Look, Mr. Finch, we get these calls all the time. 90% of them are neighbor disputes. We have to follow up on everyone. Wastes a hell of a lot of my time and your tax dollars. You're fine. Sorry to have bothered you." 2 days later, it was animal control. A cheerful young woman with a catch-pole stood on my porch. "Sir, we received a report of a vicious, neglected dog on this property. Reports of incessant barking and aggressive behavior." I stared at her. "I don't own a dog." Her smile faltered. "Oh." The report was very specific. A large, dark-colored dog, possibly a Rottweiler mix, left outside in all weather without food or water. "You're welcome to check my yard," I said, gesturing to the empty, manicured lawn. "You won't find so much as a chew toy." She did a cursory walk around, looking embarrassed. "Well, I guess it was a mistake. Sorry for the interruption." The calls became a regular feature of my life. The fire department showed up to investigate a report of hazardous materials, my collection of wood stains and varnishes, all stored properly in a fire-safe cabinet. A representative from the water department came to check for an illegal sprinkler system, tapping into the main line. I watered my lawn with a hose. Each visit was the same, an anonymous, highly detailed, and utterly false complaint, followed by a confused but duty-bound civil servant, and ending with an apology. It was more than harassment. It was a strategy of systemic exhaustion. Carol knew that each visit, no matter how baseless, chipped away at my peace. It forced me to be perpetually on the defensive, to explain and justify my innocent existence over and over to agents of the state. She was using the legitimacy of public institutions to validate her private vendetta. In her mind, if the city kept showing up, there must be something wrong with me. It was another way to poison the well, to reinforce the narrative that I was the problem. During the visit from the water department official, my mind now permanently shifted back into its old analytical groove. was not just focused on the immediate annoyance. I was observing patterns. I asked the official, a pleasant woman named Sarah, a few pointed questions. This anonymous complaint, I started, was it filed online or over the phone? Online, through the city portal, she replied. And does the portal require any form of identification or just an email address? Just an email. It's designed to make it easy for citizens to report issues. And I imagine the system logs the IP address of the submission, I asked, keeping my tone casual. Sarah looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Yes, it does. For internal use. Of course. We don't share that. Of course, I said, nodding. Internally. A file cabinet in my mind slid open. Vector of attack anonymous municipal reporting system. Potential evidence trail submission IP logs. I was no longer just Art Finch, beleaguered homeowner. I was Art Finch, senior analyst, building a case. The calls she was making were not just petty annoyances. They were data points. Each false report was a potential count of misusing public resources. A possible felony, depending on the state statutes regarding filing false police or official reports. I made another call to Marcus that night. Hey, it's Art. I'm not going to consult on the Volkov case. I'm retired. But I do have a hypothetical question for you. I hate your hypotheticals, he grumbled. They always end with me doing paperwork. Hypothetically, I continued, if someone were trying to track a pattern of vexatious and anonymous online reports to various municipal agencies, and they wanted to link them to a single source, what would be the most efficient way to petition for the IP logs from, say, 4 or 5 different city departments simultaneously, without tipping off the target that they were under investigation? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Art, what the hell kind of retirement did you get yourself into? Are you tangling with the local garden club? Never mind. I don't want to know. Hypothetically, you'd need a friendly judge to sign off on a John Doe subpoena, citing a pattern of harassment that suggests a single, malicious actor. You'd serve it to the city's IT department. They'd have to comply. Thanks. Marcus, I said. Don't thank me yet, he grunted. Just try not to get arrested. Okay, it's bad for the agency's reputation. I hung up the phone, a cold, hard sense of purpose solidifying within me. Carol thought she was clever, using the system as her shield. She never imagined that the system itself had a memory, a digital footprint. She never imagined she was harassing a man who had spent 35 years reading those footprints like a map. She was a neighborhood bully, picking a fight with a sleeping dragon, and the dragon was beginning to wake up. The final straw, the act that transformed my methodical, evidence-gathering defense into a plan for total, overwhelming retaliation, came on a Thursday afternoon. I had just returned from a trip to a specialty lumberyard, my mind blissfully occupied with the grain patterns of a beautiful piece of bird's-eye maple, when Carol's car, a pristine, white Lexus SUV, screeched to a halt in front of my driveway, blocking me in. She got out, slamming the door with a crack that echoed down the silent street. Her face was a mask of incandescent rage, her usual smug composure completely gone, replaced by a blotchy, red fury. For the first time, she looked unhinged. I know what you're doing, she hissed, marching towards me. There was no clipboard, no pretense of formal HOA business. This was raw. I have no idea what you're talking about. Carol, I said, my voice level. I leaned against my car, deliberately adopting a relaxed posture to contrast with her manic energy. Don't play dumb with me, Finch, she spat, stabbing a finger in my direction. The city. Henderson from Code Enforcement just paid me a visit. An anonymous tip about my deck not being up to code. My deck, which was built 10 years ago, and then the county assessor's office called, asking to verify the square footage of my unpermitted sunroom addition. This has your stink all over it. I remained silent. After her last stunt with the fire department, I had spent an evening on the county's public records website. It was amazing what you could find if you knew where to look. Building permits, tax assessments, property surveys. It had taken me all of 30 minutes to find several glaring discrepancies in her own property file. 2 anonymous tips, using the very system she had abused, were all it took to turn her weapon back on her. It was a simple probe, a jab to test her reaction. Her reaction was explosive. "You think you're so smart?" she sneered, her voice trembling with rage. "But you're nothing. Just a sad old man in an empty house. And I know all about you." A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into my gut. "I did some research. Mr. Art Finch," she said, her lips curling around my name as if it were poison. "It's amazing what you can find online. I know where you used to work. Department of the Treasury. Some kind of boring little pencil pusher. But a government job like that. It comes with a pension, doesn't it? And a security clearance." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It would be a terrible, terrible shame if your former employers got a letter, a concerned citizen's report, detailing your erratic and unstable behavior, your paranoia, your harassment of your neighbors. People with high-level security clearances, even retired ones, have to maintain a certain character, a certain reliability. A full-scale review of your file. That could be very disruptive to your comfortable retirement. It might even affect that big, fat pension you're living on." And there it was, the final escalation. This wasn't about grass height or wind chimes anymore. This wasn't even about false reports to the city. She had crossed a line that was both deeply personal and professionally sacred. She was threatening my life's work, my 35 years of unblemished service, my very integrity. She was threatening to burn down the entire foundation of my existence to win a petty neighborhood squabble. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The patient, document-collecting victim vanished, consumed by a cold, silent fury. The professional, the analyst, the man who had quietly dismantled the careers of arrogant, powerful criminals who thought they were untouchable, took complete control. My face remained a mask of calm, but behind my eyes, gears were turning with terrifying speed and precision. I saw her not as a neighborhood nuisance, but as a hostile target. The objective was no longer to defend, but to neutralize. "Is that a threat?" Carol, I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "It's a promise," she snarled. "You have 1 week to put your house on the market. If I see a for sale sign on this lawn by next Thursday, I'll consider the matter closed. If not, the letter gets sent. Your choice." She turned and marched back to her car, leaving me standing in my driveway, the smell of her exhaust hanging in the air. She thought she had delivered the checkmate. She had no idea she had just handed me the one weapon I needed to destroy her. She had threatened my old life, and in doing so, had given me full justification to bring its terrible, unseen power down upon her. The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association was about to be subjected to the most thorough and unforgiving audit of its miserable existence. My trip to the lake cabin was now officially on the schedule. Carol Beaumont, supremely confident in her victory, called an emergency executive meeting of the Whispering Pines HOA. The email, sent to every resident, was a masterpiece of self-serving drama. Subject urgent, upholding our community standards. The body of the email detailed a special session to be held in the community clubhouse to vote on levying an unprecedented series of fines against my property for a pattern of continuous and willful violations. And to begin the legal process of placing a lien on my house. It was a public execution, and she was the star prosecutor, judge, and jury. She scheduled it for the Saturday I was supposed to be returning from my trip. The clubhouse was packed. It seemed the entire neighborhood had turned out for the spectacle. The air was thick with gossip and anticipation. I saw David give me a worried glance as I entered, but most residents just stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Carol had done her work well. To them, I was the villain, the disruptive force that threatened their tranquil lives. Carol stood at a lectern at the front of the room, beaming, soaking in the attention. Her husband, Richard, a man whose presence was usually as memorable as a beige wall, sat at a table beside her, shuffling papers like a nervous little mouse. She was dressed in a crisp navy blue blazer, the picture of authority. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice resonating with false gravity. "It is a sad day when we must gather to address such unpleasantness. But our community is a precious thing, and we must be vigilant in protecting it." She launched into her presentation, a PowerPoint slideshow. Of course. The first slide was a picture of my house. Then came a series of photos, a close-up of the patch of grass that was a quarter-inch too long, my recycling bin at the curb at 6:03 p.m., the barely visible mildew on the north wall. It was my entire file of absurd violations, presented as a damning indictment. "These are not mere trifles," she declared, her voice rising. "They are a pattern of disrespect for the rules that bind us together, a pattern of contempt for our shared values." Then she moved to the next phase of her attack. "But it is more than that. I have received reports of unsettling behavior, of stalking, of a campaign of harassment against me and my family, including false and malicious reports to city officials." Some people gasped. She was painting my defensive jabs as unprovoked aggression, and I have recently learned that Mr. Finch has a background in a sensitive government position. This erratic behavior, from a man with his training, is not just a nuisance. It is a potential threat to our safety and security. She had me. It was the perfect narrative. I was the unstable ex-government spook, a ticking time bomb in their quiet suburb. She had framed every action, every reaction, within that narrative. She clicked to her final slide, a motion to fine me $10,000 for cumulative violations and to authorize the HOA's legal counsel to begin foreclosure proceedings. "I now open the floor for discussion," she said, her eyes glittering with triumph, "though I believe the evidence speaks for itself." A heavy silence filled the room. All eyes turned to me. This was my moment to grovel, to beg, to plead. I walked slowly to the front of the room, not to the lectern, but to the small table where the projector sat. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked directly at Carol. "You're right about one thing, Carol," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence. "This is about a pattern, but you've got the wrong one." I pulled a flash drive from my pocket. "You see, I didn't just retire from the Treasury. For the last 15 years of my 35-year career, I was a senior forensic accountant with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. My specialty was HOA fraud." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Carol's smug smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. It's a surprisingly common and dirty little crime. I continued, my voice taking on the familiar cadence of a professional briefing. People in positions of unchecked power, like an HOA president, who think the community fund is their personal piggy bank. They use shell corporations, kickbacks from vendors, falsified invoices. It's a classic scheme. I inserted the flash drive into the laptop. Her pathetic slideshow vanished, replaced by a complex flowchart. At the center was a box labeled Whispering Pines HOA operating account. Branching from it were dozens of lines and other boxes. When you threatened my career and my pension, you made a critical error. You forced me to take a closer look at you. I did what I do best. I followed the money. My finger traced a line on the screen. Let's start with Whispering Pines Landscaping, the company that has had the exclusive and massively over-budget contract for our community's lawn care for the last 8 years. A company which, according to state incorporation records, was founded by your maiden aunt and lists its primary address as a P.O. box you rent. Carol's face went white. Richard began to sweat profusely. And then there's Beaumont Community Services, the consulting firm you pay a hefty 5-figure annual retainer to for administrative oversight. That's you paying yourself, Carol, or the paving contractor who overcharged us by 40% for the cul-de-sac resurfacing last year, and then made a $20,000 donation to your husband's failed city council campaign 2 weeks later. That's not a donation. It's a kickback. I clicked through the slides. Bank statements, invoices, public records, each one a nail in her coffin. The residents were now staring at her, their faces shifting from suspicion of me to dawning horror at her. The total, over the last decade, comes to just over $472,000. Your money, I said, looking out at the stunned faces of my neighbors. Stolen from you, bit by bit, through padded fees and fake companies. By the very person who finds you for the height of your grass. I saved the best for last. And finally, I said, turning my full attention back to Carol. This week, you thought I was on a trip to a lake cabin. I needed you to think I was gone. I needed to see what you would do when you thought no one was watching. I clicked to the final slide. It was a crystal clear, high-resolution thermal image of my property from the night before. A single, bright human-shaped figure was visible, skulking near my garage. You called the police on me when I returned home early this morning, didn't you? Carol, you told them I was trespassing on my own property, that I was the suspicious person you'd warned everyone about. He was, she stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. No, I said, my voice dropping to ice. I wasn't at a lake cabin. I was in a secure room at the FBI's regional field office, giving a deposition and providing them with the entirety of this investigation. That thermal image wasn't taken by my security camera. It was taken by the FBI surveillance team that has been monitoring your house for the past 48 hours. My early return was the trigger for their operation. The police you called were met in my driveway by federal agents. The officers who came to your door an hour ago. Carol, who you thought were just here to warn you to stay away from my lake cabin. They weren't local cops. They were here to serve a federal warrant for your arrest. The doors at the back of the clubhouse swung open. 2 men in dark suits, professional and impassive, stepped inside. They walked directly toward the front table. Carol Beaumont let out a small, strangled gasp. Her reign, her little kingdom of petty tyranny built on stolen funds, had just come to a silent, spectacular end. The aftermath was swift and surgically precise. Carol and Richard Beaumont were indicted on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. The paper trail I had built was so meticulous, so irrefutable, that their lawyers advised them to take a plea deal almost immediately. Carol, as the mastermind, received a sentence of 4 years in a federal correctional facility. Richard, for his role as a compliant accessory, got 18 months of probation and was ordered to pay back the full $472,000 in restitution, forcing the sale of their house and a complete liquidation of their assets. The news spread through the community like a shockwave, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and ultimately, relief. The social fabric of Whispering Pines began to mend itself almost overnight. With the tyrant deposed, the culture of fear she had cultivated evaporated. An emergency election was held for the HOA board. David, the retired history teacher, was nominated and elected as the new president. His first act was to call a community-wide meeting, not for a trial, but for a discussion. He proposed a complete overhaul of the bylaws, striking dozens of the most draconian and petty rules. The motion passed unanimously. I became something of a local legend, the quiet man on the corner. Neighbors who had once shunned me now stopped by to thank me, to apologize, to bring me freshly baked cookies as a peace offering. I accepted their gratitude with a quiet nod, making it clear that all I had ever wanted was to be left alone. They understood. One sunny Saturday morning, I opened the box in my garage labeled Eleanor's Things. I carefully unwrapped the bamboo and shell wind chimes. I walked out onto my porch, climbed the same stepladder, and hung them from the same hook. A gentle breeze drifted through the pines, and the chimes began to play their soft, random melody. The sound no longer felt like an act of defiance. It was just a sound, a peaceful, gentle reminder of a love that endured. Across the street, a for sale sign with a sold banner across it stood on Carol's former lawn. The silence that followed was not empty or heavy. It was light. It was clear. It was the silence I had bought and paid for. The silence I had finally earned. My workshop was waiting.